What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the Fresh Finance Podcast. My name is Thomas Elms. I've got my co-host here, Kyle Ryan, as always. And today we are going to talk about what we have kind of seen as being a pretty hot topic item going around social media and kind of financial conversations right now is whether to rent or to buy. And we kind of want to break down a bit of a timeline as far as when renting could be acceptable and when buying is acceptable, but we also want to break down essentially the pros and the cons of renting and buying, and also ultimately just tie into personal situations that you might want to consider as far as if you're ready to make that next transition from renting to buying, and some of the kind of the course corrections that come along with that. So Kyle, would love to just kind of get your initial thoughts on this conversation in particular, because I know that you and I are both in that situation where we're in the process of kind of shifting over to the renting and the buying conversation. And before I do come over to you, everything that we talk about here, we're fans of both renting and buying. So there might be some situations where when you hear us talking about the cons, it might sound like we don't like either renting or we don't like the idea of buying. And we just want to make sure at the beginning of this episode here, we love the idea of both. We think both options are great, but we do want to identify what's good and what's bad about each option so that you're clearly, starting to understand the opportunity costs or the trade-offs for each.
Yeah. Yeah. And Thomas and I, we're both renters right now, but I bet we both wish we would have been homeowners in 2020.
I really wish.
Equity went up, we'd be sitting with a 2-something% mortgage. So everyone's different in every circumstance. The issue with getting a house in 2020 was, you were either not allowed to go inside of them because it was COVID, or there was 15 people waiting outside the door and it was 50,000 over asking, no inspections.
Yeah.
So yes, like you said, there's pros and cons to each. We want to hit on those. And, we also want to break down some of the hidden costs of buying a home. Renting can be very straightforward, right? If I have a washer dryer unit in my apartment and it goes, I get to call someone. I don't have to worry about the cost of that. I don't care. I just care about how quickly they get there. My rent for the duration of my length of staying there is going to stay consistent per my contract, per my lease agreement. Now, next year it may increase. That's outside of my control, but renting's very, your costs. Home ownership, the American dream, own a home, right? I've always wanted to own a home. I plan to own a home one day. It's just right now is not the right time for me, because you have to think about all the costs. And this is where I think is a good, spot for us to start, Thomas, is a lot of people don't really think about the cost. You think about, oh, I want to buy a $350,000 house. We can go into, the ways of financing that. You have a couple different ways. Ultimately, let's say you want to put 20% down on the house. That's $70,000 that you have to put down on a $350,000 house. You save up $70,000. Excuse that, sorry. You save up $70,000 and you're like, okay, I've got enough to buy a house. Let's go for it. And that's just the 20% down payment on the home. You got to think about closing costs, which can add up. You got to think about if you want to refurbish the house. What if, you buy an older house and something goes down? So there's a lot of hidden costs that we'll get into more, but that's just where I wanted to start us off.
Yeah. And on the cost side too, for homes, closing costs, kind of breaking that down, that's including the agent fees, that's including the cost of title transfer. I know that offline you mentioned that Pennsylvania has a 1% transfer tax. So that's something for Pennsylvania, home buyers that they've got to consider. And then you've got to consider, PMI, if you're not paying, putting 20% down. There's a lot of things. And then normally, like property taxes, as you said, there's a lot of things on the buying side that you have to be cash heavy on the front end that people don't necessarily take into consideration when wanting to purchase that home. Because if you rent, you normally just need first and last month's rent and you're good to go. Right.
Yep.
And maybe a security deposit, depending on the complex that you're living at, or if you're renting a home. It's very straightforward. And the ownership side is not very straightforward because some of those numbers are kind of a mystery. And some of those numbers even depend on the zip code that you're buying a home in, right? Because if you're maybe, I'm just taking like a situation here, but if you're kind of trying to buy right out of leaving your childhood family home, if you move 2 zip codes over, that process or those costs could be significantly different than what it would be in that zip code of your family home.
Yeah.
Just kind of considering those different things and making sure that you have the cash in place to cover those things as well. And it's so funny during this crazy housing market that we've seen over the last 3 years. I know at least five very close friends of mine that purchased a home and were able to cover all the, the down payment costs, the closing costs, agent fees, whatever it may be, and then a big ticket item on the maintenance side either needed to be replaced or just went out completely almost right off the bat. And I think that that's kind of the second part of the downside to purchasing a home is all of the furnishings, all of the appliances, things of that nature, they're on you to cover. And that's big ticket items like roofs, like HVAC systems, like plumbing, all sorts of different things that are, can be really high ticket cost items where if you don't have the cash, you've got to find a way to probably finance the cost of replacing those things because you can't really live in the home without it.
Yeah. It's, oh my God, if there's so many client stories I get where someone like, they have, their HVAC system went out.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing the story about a woman who lived in a house for a long time, never really had any issues with it, but then the HVAC system went out, and it was a really old house, and it went up through the attic, and it had like all these different things going on upstairs, and it was really complicated. And one guy came out, fixed the HVAC, didn't go check the attic where it like went through, and it just ended up flooding the whole house. And I just remember it was just, it's just things you never expect, right? So that's what
Yeah.
goes on. And that could happen renting an apartment too. It's just, but at the end of the day, whether we list out the pros and cons, everyone's different, right? If you don't make the decision based on the finances, you're buying a house, you're buying a home. You're not buying a property. This is about buying a home. So ultimately you want to buy a home. We just want to make sure that the costs and the risks, if you will, are understood, right? So you have to start paying for a lot of insurances that you don't have to with renting. Depending
Yeah.
on where you live, you can get anything from flood insurance to, everyone has to have homeowners insurance. It's a requirement by the bank. In order to get a mortgage, you got to have insurance because it's not your house until you pay it off.
Yeah, exactly.
You're always going to have property taxes, right? So they say, you own a home, you get to escape inflation. Well, taxes are going to go up wherever you live. And like you mentioned, depending on where you live in a really nice school area, it's getting a little gentrified or something, costs can go up significantly.
Yeah.
But it's really the hidden costs that we really want to bring the attention to. It's not just the down payment on a home. It's the closing costs. Closing costs can be, depending on the value of your house, $20,000. The annual maintenance, I've heard it could be anywhere from it could be roughly 2% of the value of your home. You can kind of anticipate to be the annual maintenance costs of your home. Some years it's gonna be higher, some years it's gonna be lower. But that's another added cost that goes into it.
Yeah. Yeah. And on the property tax side, I was just thinking about this because I've got a couple of clients that I've gotten phone calls at the beginning of this year on is recognizing which state you live in too, because a lot of the states that do not charge state income tax, places like Florida, places like Texas, they're going to get you on property tax. It's insane. I've seen a couple of demonstrations illustrating an example between a a person that lives in a state that requires state income tax and then somebody that maybe owns a home in a state that doesn't pay income tax. The property taxes almost basically outweigh the state income tax because the assessments they're issuing on these properties are just so high. It's something to definitely consider when you're evaluating whether or not you can afford a level of home that you're looking at, because it's a cost that you don't necessarily play into making a purchase decision on a home. At least most people who don't necessarily know all of the details when they're going into a purchase like that, that's something they don't calculate in, and it's something you've got to pay every year.
Yep.
And it's normally a one-time payment that you've got to come up with, and so that's something that you also need to kind of build into your cash flow plan on a monthly basis. Hey, am I saving money every month to go into an account to pay for those property taxes every year?
And that's the thing is we don't want to discourage anyone from buying a house, but you don't want to be house rich and life and everything else poor, right?
Yeah.
You don't want everything to have to go into your house because you overbought or you weren't in a situation where you were ready for a house because all of a sudden it comes up with other costs. You weren't able to get an inspection because otherwise you wouldn't have gotten a house. And lo and behold, something's wrong. And, it's just, those are the things you want to avoid. So it's just in general, be careful and make sure that you have time on your side. Don't rush into this. This is the biggest, purchase you'll ever make, most likely. So make sure that it's something that, you want to be there for a while, because generally speaking, your home needs to appreciate in value by like 7 to 10% roughly for you to break even, because you got to pay the realtor, right? That could be anywhere, roughly 6% once you're on both buy and sell side.
Yeah.
And again, in PA, there's a 2% transfer tax and 1% for the buyer, 1% for the seller. So you have to pay 2% once you buy and sell it. So you're at 8%. You have to appreciate that just to break even on your home, ignoring all these other costs.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a lot of different things you need to consider. It's not a very black and white thing, renting versus buying a home. It's a very unique thing depending on your situation and your wants.
Yeah. And to kind of flip the switch here to talk about the downsides of renting and the positives of owning here, and this is coming from a renter myself. And, Kyle, I know you're a renter as well, but the downsides of renting is you are paying the landlord's mortgage, right? Whether you're renting an in an apartment complex or you're renting a home from somebody else, you are paying somebody else's mortgage. That's money that you're not getting back. It's money that you are not putting towards, equity in a property, whether that is an apartment or a home. And I would say it's also a customization issue as well, right? If you're renting or an apartment or renting a home, you can't necessarily build that residence into something that's truly yours, right? Because I can't move into my apartment and then switch out the Whirlpool refrigerator and go put my own in, right? I can't, if I don't like the stove, I can't just go replace it, right? If I don't like the way that my bedroom is constructed, I can't just go replace it or fix it, right? From a customization perspective, renting is not a good situation on that front. And I'd also say from a privacy perspective too, you're missing out a little bit, because if you're renting an apartment, you're going to normally have units at least on your sides and most of the time above and below you, depending on which floor you live at. So, from a privacy perspective, you can't necessarily have that renting an apartment. Now, if you rent a home, there's a good amount more privacy in that aspect, but at the same time, what if you've got property management that's coming by and I had this in California, but you look out your bedroom door at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday and there's a random guy mowing your lawn, right? There's kind of just situations like that where your preferences and your privacy are being impeded on a little bit on the renting side. And it's something to definitely consider where you're at from a life perspective, especially if maybe you're married, maybe you just had your first child. You want to have that privacy, and you're willing to pay the price to own a home in order to have that privacy and that customization as well.
Yeah, and they're going to overcharge you for amenities too. I don't know if you've ever looked at two very like apartments, and if one has, I mean, I personally saw if one has a washer dryer in unit versus out of unit, I was like, it's the difference of like $300. We have
Oh,
a pool in our apartment. How
yeah,
often do we use the pool? Not that often. How much extra does it cost? I'm sure a lot more.
yeah.
So there's also there's other things that you're paying for. It's like when you pay tuition, you don't know what all the different things you're paying for. You might not use it all.
Mhm.
So you definitely have that increased cost. You're paying for someone else's equity in a different property.
Yeah. And the positive on the home ownership side is you you are, building and investing into a primary residence asset, right? Is the payments that you're making are actually increasing the equity that you do own in a home. Now, one of the caveats that I always like talking to people about is I feel like the real estate industry has really pushed this idea that owning a home is an investment. And I wouldn't necessarily classify it as an investment, right? Because when I think of an investment, I think of something that you can build up and then utilize in your daily life from a cash flow perspective, right? When you own a primary residence, you're going to pay down that mortgage and you're either going to sell that property before you do so and take those proceeds to go buy another home, or you're going to pay down that mortgage completely. You're going to own the home outright. And then at some point, you're going to sell that property and then use those cash proceeds to go buy another residence, right? There's very few situations in all reality outside of a home equity line of credit, which most home equity lines of credit are normally used for renovations anyway, right? Most people are not taking home equity lines of credit and then investing that money, especially at these rates. That is not something that I
Yep.
would technically recommend for most people. It's it's the situation where the one time I see it happening, and I've actually just had this happen. So is you're selling a primary residence and then downgrading on maybe a bedroom count, bathroom count, square footage count. Maybe you're going down to a single floor and the purchase cost of the next home is not as much. So you have some cash left over that you can utilize. So recognizing that there is a use case for paying down that mortgage, which is to ultimately own more of the home so that when you do sell it, you can walk away with more cash to put down onto the next home.
Yep.
There's a lot of benefit to that as well.
It's almost like a lot of people I've heard look at it like a forced savings, because you just kind of have to pay the mortgage. It slowly but
Yep.
surely builds up. But like you said, if you go to a like to like home, we don't even count that usually in a financial plan, right? Because you have to live somewhere. And if
Yep.
you're not going to seize the equity out of this, then it's all the same, right? But if you, like you said, if you downgrade, if you downsize, if you go rent, then it'll come back into the equation.
Yeah. Kind of on the same note, but a different trajectory, I'm really curious to see what our generation does from a home ownership perspective, because I think that the generation, I would say our parents' generation was much more, let's buy a home, let's live in this home for 30 plus years, and then we'll sell it when we retire and maybe downsize, right? I think that our generation might be a little bit different. I think our average stay is probably going to be a little bit closer to like the 5 to 15 year range. And this is solely off of the experience and the conversations I've had with people our age, right? A lot of the people that I've met or the people that I know that have purchased a home within the last couple of years, they're looking at living in that home for maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years. Now, this is also a situation where most of those people are closer to our age. They haven't necessarily settled down yet, but
Yep.
the people that I know that are our age that have settled down, that's still their thought process. And so I'm very curious to just kind of see what the future holds in that type of a real estate environment where people aren't necessarily interested in living for a home, living in a home for 30 years.
Yeah, I mean, people, we're less tied down than in our generation than people were in their previous generation.
Yeah.
Technology. I mean, what came out about COVID is you can work from anywhere, doing anything, right?
Yeah.
So you can change where you want to be, which could be a benefit of renting, because it gives you that flexibility. But yeah, I think the idea of investing in a home has got people to say, okay, I want to buy a home, put as much as I can into it in 5 years, and see if I can afford another home, turn that one into a rental,
Yeah.
that's the kind of the stories I've heard. But yeah, I think people are much quicker. It's not as much as sitting in the same home for 30 years. But again, we're in our 20s. Once we have kids and settle down, maybe we won't want all that change.
Yeah, yeah, and that's just something that we're gonna have to figure out. Me personally, I'd like to buy a home and live in it for a long time. I'd like to establish some roots somewhere, whether it's Kansas or whether it's somewhere else. And live in that property for a long time and enjoy it, because I got to see the benefits of living in a property and enjoying it, with my family and my parents, and my brother. And I think that there's a lot of value to that, because I think change brings out change, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes getting to, stick with a property through the goods and the bads has its emotional effect on you. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about is just kind of recognizing where you are at in life and whether or not it is right to purchase a home, right? Because I was just talking with a travel nurse who is now on her fourth state in 4 years that she's lived in. And she was talking about buying a home in year two, right?
Yeah.
So she was going to buy a home in that second state that she was travel nursing in. And to think that, she wouldn't even have been in that state for 2 years. She probably would have had to rent it out, which is not a bad thing by any means, but just recognizing that if you're in a place where you're maybe moving around a lot, a primary residence is probably not the best thing to look at. This is something where if you're planning on establishing some roots somewhere for at least 5 years, in my personal opinion, that's a conversation where you might just need to be comfortable with renting for that period of time.
Of course, it gives you the better flexibility. Last thing you want to do is give up your flexibility and have your hand forced.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think ultimately just kind of the gist of this conversation is just recognizing that renting is okay, especially in your 20s. It is okay. Buying, that's also really okay too. It's great. But the time in which you do those things needs to ultimately depend on your personal situation. And having somebody like an advisor to kind of bounce these ideas off of, where they know what your personal financial situation looks like, because these real estate agents, these mortgage loan officers, they truly don't know your situation, right? They might get some statements, they might do some analysis, but the real estate agent is trying to sell a home and the loan officer is trying to get you to get a mortgage, right? That's their ultimate goal, right? It's kind of like selling nails to hammers, right? It's you got to recognize where they're coming from, because a lot of these people are very good at selling, right? They can tell you that they know your personal situation, and the reality is their pay process is assimilated with you purchasing a home or getting a mortgage, right? So just kind of recognizing that you need to kind of take a step back and make sure that this is the right time for you to do either thing is important.
Yeah, on that note, what you get pre-approved for is not always what you can personally afford. So just that's a huge, because I remember I got pre-approved for a mortgage once. I was like,
Yeah.
no way. But yeah, I mean, yeah, they'll always drink the Kool-Aid. If you ask them if it's the right time to buy a house, it's always the right time to buy a house.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good note to add, is pre-approval is the maximum loan amount that they would possibly allow you to be qualified for, that they feel comfortable taking on the risk of themselves, right? Because they take on the risk of foreclosure, right? Yeah, it's not what you can afford. It is the absolute maximum that they're comfortable loaning to you. So that's a really good point. Really good point. If anybody ever has questions, if you're watching this, you're not necessarily sure where you're at, or where, kind of which stage you think that you're in, or if you're looking to transition to that buying process, please reach out to us. We'd love to talk with you. We'd love to see kind of where you're at and where you're looking to go, and we can put a plan together for you that can help you kind of identify what the pros and cons are in your personal situation for the renting and the buying. And we're happy to help. So Kyle, thank you for your time. Thank you to everybody that's watching and listening, and we'll see you next time.